Hi everybody, and welcome to this revision video on the psychosexual stages of the psychodynamic theory according to Freud as part of the psychology of the individual topic for stage 2 psychology. So let's get started. So this is key concept 3 of Sigmund Freud's psychodynamic theory, and it's also the most well-known, but also the most controversial for reasons that will become apparent as we go through. So as part of Freud's psychodynamic theory, he also theorized the importance of childhood experiences shaping our psyche or our personality as adults. And this led to the development of the very famous psychosexual stages. So Freud believed that we all develop through these psychosexual stages that focus on a particular erogenous zone, so part of the body, in other words, which seeks pleasure. Now, should a child become over or understimulated on this erogenous zone to get too much pleasure or not enough pleasure, they will then become fixated, which will result in maladaptive behavior in adulthood, or problematic behavior in adulthood, in other words. So, Freud's psychosexual stages of development are the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. So let's look at these in more detail. So, the first stage is the oral stage. This is from birth until 18 months of age, according to Freud, where the erogenous zone is the mouth, and children at this age receive stimulation from oral activities. So that's why Freud theorized that babies will constantly want dummies or pacifiers in their mouths and will also always be putting random things in their mouths. Now, Freud theorized that if the child becomes over-fixated, they will then, as adults, do compulsive things with the mouth in adulthood, like I said before. So they will engage in smoking, biting their nails, and overeating or over-talking. Now, if someone has these personality traits or these behaviors, Freud theorized that the child between these ages, so birth to 18 months, got too much satisfaction or too much pleasure from the oral stage of putting things in their mouth, and then they become fixated on it as adults. However, the reverse can also be true. So sometimes children will become underfixated, so not get enough pleasure at the oral stage of psychosexual development. So then it makes sense that they will be underfixated, so they will undereat, not talk much, and become shy. And Freud theorized that is because they didn't get enough stimulation at the oral stage of development. So next is the anal stage of psychosexual development. This occurs from 18 months to 3 years of age. It's at this age that children are learning to go to the toilet, and Freud theorized that this is the first experience that a person gets of control, in this case, controlling their bowel movements. So the child is fixated on bowel movements due to, of course, toilet training. Now, he theorized that this can result in being anally retentive or anally expulsive. So, in other words, someone can be getting too much pleasure at this age, all right, because of the anal stage, and become anally retentive as adults, or not get enough pleasure from this stage and then become anally expulsive. So, control is achieved through execution of tasks or lack thereof. So, overfixation or too much pleasure, in other words, at the anal stage, can result in obsession with cleanliness and control. So Freud theorized that children that get too much pleasure from evacuating their bowels will then become obsessed with this control as adults and will become very, very pedantic, very, very conscientious, and will be obsessed with cleanliness and organization and control. Whereas children who do not get enough stimulation or enough pleasure during the anal stage, the opposite will occur. So it will result in messiness, disorganization, and oversharing rather than having control of their lives. So the saying, oh my goodness, they're so anal, this is where that comes from. Okay, next is the phallic stage. And again, this is one of the parts, or probably the most controversial part of Freud's theory. But it's often still referred to today and used in a lot of mainstream media as well. So let's look at this in more depth. So this occurs from 3 years to 6 or 7 years of age, where the child becomes fixated on the genitals due to learning the difference between the genders or the sexes. So it's usually during this time that boys and girls will notice that there's a difference between them in terms of genitals and so on. So the child develops a desire, according to Freud, for the opposite sex parent. Now, this is an unconscious desire, and views the same-sex parent as a threat. So once a child learns that there's a difference between males and females biologically, Freud theorized that because of that, the child develops an unconscious sexual desire for the opposite sex parent and has a deep-seated hatred towards the same-sex parent as they see them as a threat. So Freud theorized that boys develop an unconscious sexual desire for their mothers. This is called an Oedipus complex. Now, he also theorized that girls develop penis envy and blame the mother for not providing them with one, and then develop an unconscious desire for their fathers. This is called an Electra complex. So overfixation or too much stimulation at this stage or overfixation at this stage results in behaviors including vanity, narcissism, and sometimes compulsive sexual behavior, particularly engaging in sexual activities with people who resemble the opposite sex parent. Freud also argued that overfixation resulted in adults seeking characteristics, like I just said, in a partner similar to their opposite sex parent. So you've heard of the term mama's boys and daddy's girls. Freud theorized that was because of this unconscious sexual desire for opposite sex parents between 3 to 6 or 7 years of age. Okay, then we have the latency stage. This is from 6 years to puberty. This is where things just settle down a little bit. So sexual urges remain repressed during this time, and children typically interact with the same sex peers or same gendered peers. There's no bodily fixation zone at all. Everything just calms down. And it's usually at this stage as well, Freud theorized at the time, like I've said here, children typically interact with the same sex peers and won't want to interact with opposite sex peers. So the whole concept of boy germs and girl germs, that Freud likened that to the latency stage. So during this time, the child develops relationships and a sense of themselves, so 6 years to puberty, which obviously starts around 12 to 13. And the superego starts to develop at this age, or it is developed at that age. So feelings of guilt and shame are developed in a healthy way because the focus is not on sexual urges like the previous 3 stages. It's developing a sense of themselves and other relationships and a healthy sense of guilt and shame. Now, according to Freud, the lack of successful completion of this stage results in difficulty establishing and maintaining meaningful relationships. So someone who can't sustain a meaningful relationship, whether it's romantic or not, whether it's, platonic or whatever, it's because they didn't complete the latency stage properly, according to Freud. Then we have the final stage, which is the genital stage. So this begins at puberty, so around 12 to 13 years, right through to adulthood. Now, at this time, Freud theorized that there is a resurgence of sex drive in adolescence, and all of a sudden, opposite sex relationships become very, very important. So it's usually around this time that individuals' first relationship will occur. So boyfriends and girlfriends and so on. And it will also be typically the time of the first sexual experience. So because of that, the focus is on the genitals. But what also happens during the genital stage is unresolved conflicts or fixations from earlier stages of oral, anal, phallic, and latency start to emerge. So it's here that the fixations will start to be obvious. So too much or too little fixation. So what I mean by that is usually in the genital stage, if someone had an oral fixation, it will start to develop here or will show itself here. So that people may start to engage in smoking or biting their nails or talking too much. That would suggest they have an oral fixation. They may start to become very messy and disorganized. That means they had a lack of fixation in the anal stage, and that'll become more obvious during this stage, the genital stage, which begins at puberty right through to adulthood. So you can remember the psychosexual stages using the acronym OAPLG, so Old Age Pensioners Love Golf. And the psychosexual stages, like I said before, is the most controversial part of Freud's theory, but it still has a massive influence on other branches of psychology and the media. So a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows will use parts or link characters and make them very obvious in terms of their fixations because it's entertaining and it's popular. People find this interesting. Now, I will say, and I would have said this in class, and I've said this in my previous videos as well, is that this is not proven by science. This is just a theory, based on Freud's own clinical practice of interviewing his clients. There's no scientific merit to this because it's impossible to test. However, a lot of people still agree with the psychodynamic theory, particularly this, because it does explain certain behaviors in childhood, and it can explain, not through science or, proven results, but it can explain to a point adult behavior as well. So there's still a lot of people that believe in the psychodynamic theory, including the psychosexual stages. So that is it for this revision video, ladies and gentlemen and peeps. I hope that you found this really useful. As always, any questions, let me know.